I'm Nikki Nolan, and this is A Matter of Life and Debt, a show about people in the United States and their student debt. Today's episode, A Reality of No Student Debt. I talk with artist Forrest Gerke around a new subject matter for the show, what it is like to live with no student debt. The part that I found the most remarkable during our conversation was the difference of what happened to him versus the other guest after he graduated. Because he wasn't worried about making loan payments, he was able to move to New York City with $5,000, 2 suitcases, a guitar, and a dream. This is his story. Welcome to the podcast!
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to be here too. So I have brought you here to talk a little bit about student debt. So usually how I start off the show is like, how much student debt do you have?
I have $0 in student debt.
Is that because you've never had debt, or is it because you've paid it off?
It's because I never had any to begin with. So I somehow made it through school without having to take out loans.
So how did you do that? Like, what did you do to like not accrue debt?
I had a very strict budget that I stayed to, and I worked full time while I was in school full time. So I spent probably 35 to 40 hours a week working in call centers when I was in school. And then I was taking a full credit load at the same time. So I did a lot of work and I didn't sleep very much. And I still managed to have way too much fun in between. I didn't grow up with a lot of money. And I think that my parents did a pretty good job of explaining to me the financial obligation and burden that school would be for me. And so when I was 15, I got my first job and I've pretty much been working ever since. I saved all of my money. And so for my first couple of years of school, like I had actually done enough to save up enough money for the year ahead each year. And so, yeah, that was something I will credit my mother for that because she's really good at saving and managing money and setting up budgets. And so yeah, I was actually able to do that for my first couple of years of school of just paying a year ahead. All the money that I would make after that was to go to the next semester or the next year.
So you said your parents sat you down. What did they tell you about? Like, what were some of the real things that they told you to consider financially?
I mean, they let me know that with their financial situation that they wouldn't be able to pay for things up front. Like they offered me as much help as they could. And so I was definitely grateful for that. But the majority of the burden was on me for the financial side of it. So that was something that I think just having that knowledge up front when I was about 15, starting to think about college was really helpful. And so when I was working, I had a job at the local movie theater. I grew up in a really small town, so that was a really cool job to have. But yeah, I didn't spend my money. I saved most of it, and I tried to be really thoughtful about how I was spending things. And so then my first couple of years of school, like I continued working, but I was really good at just living pretty modestly. So like I used to have a $25 a week grocery budget
Oh my God. Yeah, I can spend $25
on lunch.
just
Yeah. Like
yeah, just turning my head and looking at something. I'm like, "Oh, $25 gone."
yeah. I mean, and this was like 2003. So it was, I mean, a little bit different than now, but still that was for most people that I knew, like I was spending way less money and just living very minimally. But yeah, it was something that I think looking at the benefits that I got from making those sacrifices up front and not having to go into debt for school, I think it was worth eating like tortillas and beans for 3 years. I think a lot of that is because my parents were just pretty upfront with how the world worked. And so I think that they gave me a concept that going to school was important and having an education would be something that would be valuable to me in a lot of ways. But I think that they really tried to help me understand the freedom that you can have with if you're not in debt And so, because before I went to college, like my parents had gone through a period where they had some debts that they had incurred for their own businesses that they were running, and they had to work really hard to aggressively pay them down to kind of get themselves back into a better financial situation. And so I think just because they had gone through that in their own lives, like when I was a preteen, by the time we started having these conversations about college and looking forward to my upcoming adult life, I think that they wanted to have to give me something that's benefit that they had learned from their own difficulty in those choices that they had to deal with paying off large sums of money in pretty aggressive ways. so so I'm grateful to them for that, because they did not sugarcoat it. They did not pretend that like life was going to be easy, but they encouraged me to do what I felt I was the most passionate about and the most interested in. And then we problem solved to find ways to pay for it.
So usually I ask, because usually people have debt, but you have no debt. What was what was the impact of debt? So I think what I'm gonna ask you is like, after you graduated, like, and you had no debt, what was that like?
I mean, I think my first reaction to graduating and not having to do basically two full-time jobs at the same time was that I had a lot of time left over. So my undergraduate degrees were in fine arts, and my first year and a half out of school, only working 40 hours a week, I just felt like that was softball. It was so easy. And so I started doing an artist residency with this little cooperative gallery in the town that I was living in at the time, Fort Collins, Colorado. And so that really helped me launch and develop my studio practice that set up good habits and gave me a lot of foundation to build from later on in the years since then as well.
Oh, so jealous when I hear that like people get a focus on like things that are important. So
I mean, and
this is
that's not to
this.
say that I was just it was all smooth sailing. I mean, I graduated in December of 2008, so right after the economy crashed. And so there were definite plans that I had for internship programs that I'd applied to with like art museums all over the country. And I applied to almost 30 programs, I think, in the late summer of 2008. And then by the time I graduated in December, like almost all of them had shut down except for three or four. So they became super competitive, and it was much harder to get into them. So it just so there was a big reset that I had to do after that. But I also think like not having a ton of debt to worry about in that, even though it was a stressful time and there was a lot of uncertainty, like it still kind of lightened the burden not having to worry about that part of things.
Yeah, '08 was like a rough year. I'm gonna to say the least. '08 with like a degree in art was like
Yeah.
not.
No, I definitely questioned some of my life choices at that point.
I feel like this is a good transition. I just want to know more about you.
Yeah, so ever since I was a really young kid, I always wanted to be an artist. And so that's something that there's like videotapes of me when I was 4 talking about wanting to either be an illustrator and make children's books, or like be an animator for the Disney company, which is now like not a thing that people do by hand. But in like the late 80s, that seemed really cool because that was when all of that golden age of all those Disney films came out. So I think that was inspiring to me. But yeah, I always kind of kept with that. And so I gratefully had parents that encouraged me to pursue those interests, and they never, I mean, they were both creative people themselves. Like my mom's a potter and my dad is a musician and a photographer. And so I was never discouraged from pursuing that. But definitely when I got into high school and I started taking it more seriously, that was something that I talked to my art teachers about, that I eventually wanted to study art for college. And so with the limited resources in my poorly funded arts program in the small town where I grew up, I mean, I tried to at least get as much advice from people there as I could to kind of help steer what I would do for portfolios and things I should work on and get used to.
Is there any advice that you got from them that was actually helpful? Sorry to stop you. I just
Oh,
want to
no,
make
no,
sure
no,
I
no. Actually, no, I did not get very much advice, and any that I might have gotten was definitely not useful. But I was at least, but I was like in all of the art classes, and I was even part of like the art club at my high school, and we did like fundraisers. We did like henna tattoos for people before prom so that we could save up our money to go on a trip to the Denver Art Museum. That was like our big trip because we had to drive clear across the state of Colorado. So it was like a 6-hour drive, and then we had to, pay for motel and stuff. So it was like that was a really big deal. And we paid for most of that through doing henna tattoos for the prom. I mean, it was cultural appropriation at its finest. It was a bunch of white kids doing this thing that we had no idea what the actual cultural background was, but but that happens a lot in the arts, unfortunately.
So you were in high school, and then what happened? Like, tell me about graduation and like what you decided to do.
Yeah, I mean, so I actually had a really specific plan when I got out of high school that I had to amend, but I thought that I really wanted to go to a school that had a traditional hand-drawn illustration program. And so those are a lot of schools that had programs like that in the past kind of replaced them with modern graphic arts programs. And so I really wanted to go to a school that had that. There was a school in Utah, which was the state next door to me, that had a program like that that was really respected. And so I thought, well, this is what I want to do with my life. I know everything at 18. I am super smart. And so I couldn't afford to go to that school in Utah with out of state tuition. So I went to a cheaper school for a year, had a miserable time. It was a very bad fit for me for a lot of reasons. But it encouraged me to kind of reassess my goals. And so I realized that I still wanted to do art, but it wasn't as important to me to necessarily do that specific program. And so I transferred back in state to a school in Colorado State University, and I did the painting program there. And about halfway through my time there, I also added an art history degree because I was like, I just really wanted to be that lucrative in my choices of what to do. I went to CSU and actually had a great time there. It was, for being not like famously an art school, it's more like an engineering and sciences kind of school. They still had a really big art program with lots of different concentrations and tons of other students. And so I really, I felt like I got the most out of it that was available to me there, because there was just like a lot of really great professors and different things to try. So I was able to do like some really good foundational skills and learn about like sculpture and printmaking and pottery and things like that, in addition to the painting coursework that I did.
What made you decide to go to that first school? And then what things did you sort of decide upon that made you go to Colorado State?
Yeah, I mean, it does have a lot to do with finances. Like I really wanted to go to one of those schools that had the traditional illustration program, but I knew that going to a private art school was just out of the question financially for me. And so the school that I was aiming to go to in Utah was a state school. So if I could have lived there for a year to establish residency, then it would have been much more affordable with in-state tuition. And so that directed a lot of my choice to go to that specific school. It wasn't like I had some strong desire to live in Salt Lake City, but which, I mean, not to knock Salt Lake City, it's actually, there's some pretty cool stuff there. It really had a lot to do with finance.
So, what did you want to be while you were in college? Like, what was sort of your dream of what life was going to be after you graduated? Like, what were you working for?
Oh, I mean, like when I first started college, I had these really hippy dippy ideas that I would like become a painter slash yoga instructor. Which is, I mean, not to knock it. I know people who are both of those things, and it's great. But it's also like that's a really hard thing to like make a living at and get insurance and like pay your bills on time. So, but yeah, that was kind of like my naive goal. I think as I continued through school, I I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I did know that it was important for me to keep pursuing art. And I think since I had that experience during school of, doing my full load of art classes and studio work and working full time, it wasn't a stretch for me to think of moving forward into the future and maybe having a day job that wasn't art related, but something that would help me sustain my studio practice. And so even though I don't think I was mature enough to have really like fleshed it out in that way yet, I still think that it helped me put that balance into my head. And so by the time I actually finished with school, like that was a place that I could go. And it was something that I mean, I had a job out of school with Constant Contact, which was an email marketing, or they still are an email marketing tech company. But it was like a really fun job to have. I really liked the people that I worked with. And then when I was there, most of my clients that I dealt with were like small businesses and nonprofit organizations. And so it was just really cool to kind of hear from these people who were using this tool that I was supporting to kind of help them like live their dreams and make their business goals happen. I think it put me in a mindset that made me a little bit more open to the idea of balancing a day job with my creative work, but hoping to someday find a happy medium where I could include both of those things in my life. It was kind of a lucky job to get right out of school.
So, what's happened since then? You worked at Constant Contact, and now I know you now live in New York City. Can you bridge the gap for me? Like, what has happened between then and now, and
Yeah,
what are you
so
up to?
I mean, I will say that yeah, so this probably relates very much to the topic of the podcast with debt. But when I was 25, I decided I'd been out of school for like a year and a half, and I decided that I wanted to try living in New York City. Like that was always kind of my dream. I came to New York to visit when I was in college several times and fell in love with it. And so I kind of had a dream of trying to live here. But I think that was something that seemed really out there to me just because I knew New York was going to be expensive. I didn't know anybody in New York. I didn't have any family or friends there. I didn't have like any work connections lined up. But I think because I did not have debt, I was able to take some risks financially and come. When I worked at Constant Contact, they had these sign-on bonuses. Like if you referred somebody who worked there for 90 days, you'd get like a $2,500 bonus. So I recommended, I think, two or three people who ended up working there. And so I was able to save up like $5,000 that way. And so that was my little nest egg to move to New York. And so I moved here in the late spring of 2010. And it was super cliche. It was, like $3, two bags, one me, like I came here with two suitcases and a guitar and $5,000 and just hoped for the best. And so my first couple of years in the city were really difficult financially. I had a few different just crappy jobs, and and I was really sacrificing. Like I mean, I it was a big financial risk to come here, and I knew that at any moment, like if things didn't work out, I'd have to go back and like live with my parents for a while in my hometown, which is something that did not appeal to me at all. I think that was a good incentive to just make it work. And so but if I would have had loan payments to worry about, like I don't think that I could have been as risky and done that. And so now fast forward 10 years later, I'm still in New York. I still really love living here, and I've had jobs in the tech industry over that time that have kind of sustained me, and definitely they've upgraded over time. So in the last few years, I'm able to live in an apartment by myself, and I have a studio in my living room that has been a really productive space for me, and I've been getting a lot of artwork done. And I found like a good balance between the day jobs that I have and my studio practice, and also like trying to promote my work online and get things out into the world, and sometimes put things into juried shows. I've done a couple of those since I've been here too. But yeah, I mean, a lot of that I credit the ability to do that with not having to, have the responsibility of loan payments the whole time. And compared to a lot of my friends and people that I've worked with over the years, when I just see how that's changed their decision making, I'm really grateful that I was able to like make a lot of sacrifices and work my butt off on the front end of things, which was not easy. I'm not going to like tell anybody that it was fun. There were times that I resented it a lot when I was doing it, but for that relatively short time period in my life where it's like you're young and stupid and you bounce back anyway, like, I mean, yes, put all of your suffering in on your early 20s. Like, you're going to do it anyway, so you may as well just like make it worthwhile. But yeah, so now I'm in my mid 30s, and I'm really living a life that's kind of, it aligns with the dreams that I had for myself when I was younger. And of course, it's the reality of things have been a little bit different in terms of the types of work that I do, but I'm still living in a place that I love, and I'm able to be inspired by all of the great museums and galleries and just culture that's all over the place here. And I'm able to have a studio and make artwork and do things that I'm really proud of. And so it's, for me, I feel like it's been a fulfillment of a lot of my hopes and my dreams that I had when I was younger, but definitely it's been a ton of work, but totally worth it. Yeah, where should we go from here? I'm sorry, I kind of lost my train of
No, no,
thought.
no, no. I think you're. I mean, like, I think you hit on all of the points that it was like. What were your dreams and where are you now? And it sounds like you had some dreams. Maybe they were a little bit more abstract when you were younger, but as you manifested through college, you realized this kind of, you're going to need this balance of like work to support your art, and you were very realistic and grounded in your pursuits. So with all of this like sort of life experience that you have gotten, if you could like turn back and tell your younger self something, some advice to get them through, or anything, if you had a time machine, you could go back, tell your younger self some advice. What would you tell yourself?
Oh, plenty. If I could tell a younger person who's in art school or has ambitions to do something with creative work in their life, I would just say learn what you can about managing yourself as a small business. Like, understand how to do your own bookkeeping, understand just kind of the basics of, invoicing and figuring out ways to promote yourself and to make a website. And now, especially, I think with Instagram and different social platforms that are really useful to artists, like they of course those didn't exist when I was in college, but because I'm not young. but I mean, just like understanding that there's always going to be things to learn and resources to reach out to. And so I just think that if I would have known a little bit more about managing myself as a small business, I think I could have gone more quickly into some of the areas that I've gotten into more recently. So like now I'm selling work on my website, and I have kind of an e-commerce setup there, and I take in portrait commissions and I sell like prints of other work. And so that's something that, running an online store, although it's not rocket science, it definitely still takes a lot of effort and know-how. Like, I didn't know anything about having to set up a payment processor and how to collect taxes for transactions that require taxes, and I didn't know about the ways that you'd have to find shipping vendors to send things, and how to deal with invoicing and payments and things like that. And so yeah, I just think that, like, although that's not the glamorous side of doing creative work, and it's definitely not At least not for me. It's not the fun side of it. It is essential and it's necessary if you want to do that as a business. And so I would just say if I would have known about these things when I was younger, it wouldn't have killed me to like take a couple of business classes when I was in college, or just to take like an accounting class just to do basic financial math, or learn how to use Excel. Like that's something that I did not know how to do out of college, and I've had to learn the hard way since. But yeah, I mean, I think that otherwise there's just a lot of, I think the good things that I got out of my arts education were, the ability to be broad-minded about things, to accept critique and feedback, and to be able to use that to kind of build new iterations of your own work and your own process, and to really be open to learning from others. And so that was all kind of baked into the experience that I had in the program, and I think that that's still very relevant. And there's still artists that I know, and people that are entrepreneurs who are doing things that I find really impressive and interesting. And so like now I'm not as timid to pick somebody's brain and just be like, okay, I really like what you're doing here with your website. Can I ask you a few questions about that? And because like when people have asked me about things that I've done, like I feel fine sharing any knowledge that I have. Like I don't feel like that's proprietary or anything. Like I think that there's enough within the arts, like there's enough for us all to do that we don't have to be competing with each other necessarily. So I'm always happy to learn from other people's techniques, and then if they have questions about mine, to share that with them. But yeah, for young people, especially young people in art school, or people who, and and that's not to say that art school is necessary to become an artist. Like for me, I'm really glad that I did it, and there were a lot of really useful tools that I think I got from the experience, but in no way do I think it's required. So for other people who might be listening to this, who are, interested in doing creative work, I would just say the best thing that I got out of my art school experience was a community of people where I learned from a lot of diverse ways of thinking and diverse ways of problem solving and doing things. And so anybody can find a community of people to learn from. And so I just think like that's really essential. And even now that I've been out of school for a long time, I still have people in my life that that I can get feedback from, and ask them to look at my work and tell me, to give me honest opinions about things, and to look at a website that I'm creating and to tell me if it works or if something can be tweaked or improved. So yeah, I just think it's really good to set yourself up in a community of like-minded people, but people who are enough different from you that you can gain things that you wouldn't find out on your own.
Well, we've come to the end. Is there anything that you would like to plug?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody would like to see my work and buy some of it on my website, I'm happy to direct them there. It's my website is just my name, Forrest Gerke. So ForrestGerke.com. And I'm also on Instagram. If you just look up my name there, Forrest Gerke Studio, it's on there. But yeah, I mean, and also I welcome anybody's feedback about my website or my Instagram, since we were just talking about the necessity of feedback. So definitely feel free to drop me a line and tell me what you think.
Thank you so much for being on this show. This has been lovely.
Well, it's my pleasure. It was really fun talking to you.
Matter of Life and Debt is produced by me, Nikki Nolan. Special thanks to F.A. Achman for creating the music and mastering the audio. Additional support and thanks to Sarah Tebow, who writes the information and transcripts about each episode. This podcast would not have been possible without them. Visit our website for more information, matteroflifeanddebt.com, where you can listen, read transcripts, get additional context of the subjects you just heard about, subscribe, absolutely for free. That website again, matteroflifeanddebt.com. Thanks again for listening.